You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb. How are you today?
I am, you switched the tables on me. Woo, look at that. I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm good.
So I've been thinking about thinking, which is metacognition.
Is what they call stinking thinking in the AA community?
A lot of it is stinking thinking, right.
Because historically you fall into that pattern.
I do fall into that.
As do I.
Oh, absolutely. I am the king of stinking thinking.
Yeah.
No question.
Bad things are going to happen. I just feel it. I just know it's not going to be a good day today.
And I've said forever to clients, what I don't understand, people come to my office all the time and say, man, things are going really well, and that freaks me out because I just know that means something bad is going to happen. Mm-hmm. I've never had anybody come to my office and say, man, things have been going really stinky, but that's okay because that just means something's good's going to happen.
I have actually had somebody say that.
You have?
Good things are going to happen now.
Good.
I'm almost at the limit of all the bad things that can happen.
Well, that's fantastic.
So
I would love to hear some.
You can have a wreck on the way home.
Yeah, I was going to
fall down the steps and break your leg.
Although that means that you have to have a lot of bad things happening. I guess I don't want to wish that on anybody. Yeah. But I really genuinely believe that most of the problems that we have, specifically in our society, in United States Western society, are the result of that stinking thinking.
That's an interesting concept. Say more about it.
So what we're specifically talking about is the concept of rumination or perseveration, whatever word you want to use. The psychology word that is most commonly used is rumination. And rumination means feeding a thought back on itself. And so humans, because we have our big monkey brains, have the ability to think a thing and then continue to feed that thought back on itself over and over again, which just exacerbates its emotional impact. So you could have
like an obsessive thought.
It can be. It can be. And I guess I've never thought about it in terms, but certainly obsessive compulsive individuals do ruminate. I think all of us ruminate. It just depends on the extent to which we do and how long we allow that rumination to go unchecked before we try and intervene, either consciously or unconsciously. But we all have messages. You talk about it all the time, that you have these tapes that play in your brain. And you explain it really, really well with the old kind of cartridge-based answering machines, which most people nowadays won't know what we're talking about.
No, they won't.
But back in the day, you had answering machines that had two tapes, and one was the outgoing message, the other one was a recording of the incoming message before we had solid-state recording devices. And on that message, that message, the outgoing message, that was a message that you can't change. And so a lot of us grow up with messages from our childhood.
Or they'll recognize it. You call somebody today in our business, and you'll get a message that says, "Oh, we're not open right now. We're open, we open normally Mondays through Fridays,
right,
9 to 5. But leave a message and we'll get back to you."
Right.
And so then you leave, and every message that somebody leaves is different.
Right. And so when we ruminate, we are playing those messages in a loop back on themselves.
So I knew we were going to be talking about this, and I want to ask what you think. There are times when I have like a song fragment stuck in my head. I wake up in the morning and I'm singing it in my head. I don't sing out loud ever, but I hear it singing in my head. And I can't interrupt it. I can't get rid of it. It won't go away. Is that what you would call rumination?
I would call that rumination, absolutely. I think that it's obviously a different form of rumination, but go ahead.
Well, in my experience, I think it tends to come more frequently or more insistently when I'm anxious about something. So if I know I'm going to a surgery and I'm worried about the surgery, I may have that haunt me all day. And sometimes when you're in a stressful environment, like if you hear a song on the radio, you can't get it out of your head. It just stays all day long played,
Right.
and it's usually one stanza. It's not you don't sing the whole song.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like one set of words. It just keeps playing over and over and over and over again. That's an example. I wonder if there are others that we could use that people would recognize.
So, one of the things that has been transformative to me about writing this book is obviously now I'm doing a lot of research into the subjects that we're talking about. And so I did some examination of this idea of rumination, because what I wanted to know is, can children, before they acquire language, ruminate? So can a child that doesn't know language, doesn't speak, can you ruminate? And the answer is yes. So before you learn to speak, then you learn through a process that Piaget called sensory motor learning. So you learn because of the way that you get messages into the body, right? And so children ruminate through a sensory motor kind of process, and it is, and rumination develops as a coping mechanism. So you are exactly right. I sing that song to myself as a coping mechanism to deal with my anxiety over this impending surgery.
So in looking at a child, an infant, pre-verbal infant, who's making repetitive motions, like over their head, their hand comes into view and goes away, and comes into view and goes away. Children learn to control their bodies down and out. So they learn to control their mouth, obviously. Right. Their hands before their feet. And you see them. Their feet they're laying on their back, and their foot comes into view, and they're like, oh, and they reach out and grab it. So they learn to grasp it and hold it. So then they're playing with their foot. So they put it in their mouth or what have you. You would say that's a kind of ruminative process?
That's sensory motor learning.
Right.
Now, I don't know that it's rumination. So rumination would be if the motion were repetitive as a way of creating pleasure or avoiding anxiety. So
what kind of magical thinking?
I would call it a defense mechanism more than magical thinking. Magical thinking is a defense mechanism, but it's just another one of the defense mechanisms that we develop as we grow to be able to remain homeostatic.
Well, also looking at a pre-verbal infant, we're projecting our understanding. Just
correct,
because we project it onto our dogs.
That's right. Because we can't ask them.
Right.
But we definitely know that you can learn through sensory motor input, that is how a child begins to learn. We also know that you can learn that way throughout the course of your lifespan. So every adult who's ever learned how to ride a bike, learned how to swing a golf club, learned how to catch a baseball, those are sensory motor processes. You don't learn those through language. You learn those through inputs in your body. So you can continue to learn through sensory motor input all the way through your lifespan. We just don't pay any attention to it once we learn language, because language is just so much more powerful. Yeah, exactly.
When you first learn to tie your shoe, it's so frustrating. Or teach a child to tie their shoe. They don't have the physical motor coordination. They don't know what they're doing. They get angry. They get frustrated. They don't want to learn to tie their shoe. They want you to tie it for them because they want to get up and go run and play.
Right.
And so then you have a power struggle with the child over, you're going to sit on the couch until you tie your shoe. And I'll sit here with you, and I'll talk you through it and show you the steps. You're going to have to do it. And they will have a meltdown, and they will cry, and they'll be upset. So then would they ruminate about tying their shoe? Would they get anticipatory frustration because you're getting them dressed and they know, crap, that's going to come up again?
I would say that they could ruminate. I don't know that they would ruminate by thinking about tying their shoe. They might ruminate by doing so. For example, one of the things that we know is that there are these things called tic disorders, where a person will have a visual muscle contraction that may be voluntary, may be involuntary, we don't know. Some of that is probably sensory motor rumination.
Okay.
And it is a behavior that the individual engages in as a way to stave off anxiety. When they look at infants, one of the primary ways, or one of the only ways that I've ever read about that they track this, is through blinking. So if you look at a child and the child is blinking, but in a pattern that doesn't
Blink
have
rate,
anything to do
yeah.
with, I need to re-wet my corneas, then some of that is a process of rumination. So we learn to ruminate even before we learn language. Once we learn language, language becomes the primary way
But I can
that
see
most
that
of us ruminate.
clinically, not even a child. If I'm doing an
Sure,
old man like
absolutely.
you, and
Right.
you're sitting across from
Yeah, yeah.
me, and you suddenly go away somewhere, and you just become real still, and you stare off into the distance, and we're not connecting, and you're not tracking me, and you aren't saying anything, and I'll say, "Where'd you go?" And you know, what?
Right.
I ain't going anywhere.
Right. Now that's a defense mechanism,
Yeah.
so that's probably what's that called? Anyway, I'm blanking on the name. When a person blanks out,
Dissociative process.
dissociative process, yes. So, which would not be necessarily rumination. Now, you may do both. You may be dissociative and you may ruminate.
Or maybe on a scale of intensity.
I've never thought about it that way, but I would be willing to accept that as a premise.
Because I remember talking to people that would describe how, as children experiencing some kind of abuse, they would just go away into the Venetian blinds or into the light on the ceiling or someplace or the window, and whatever happened to their body happened, but they weren't there for it.
Right.
And so they learn that, and as they age and other things intrude in their life, what they've learned is when something starts to get frightening or intense and at a level that I don't think I can handle, I just go away.
And
I don't
so
come back until it's over.
Right, and dissociation, the way in which I would distinguish that from rumination is dissociation is a process of encapsulation. So I'm encapsulating parts of my ego, parts of myself in this box that I don't allow anything to intrude in.
Well, especially physical stimuli.
Yes.
Like if I go to the doctor and they say, "Oh, I'm going to take a blood sample, and there's going to be a stick, warning me so that I don't jerk or I don't, overreact." I often tell them, "Don't worry, I learned to be dissociative by the time I was 3 years old. I'll just go away. When you finish, let me know." And they laugh like, "Oh, you're being funny," but I'm dead serious. I can do that.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with any defense mechanism, dissociation, rumination, whatever.
Yeah.
That's why we have them, because they're defense mechanisms. They help keep us homeostatic. They help keep us safe and whole. But anything to an extreme can be pathologic.
Yes. So as we have this conversation, we're talking about infants preverbal, developing it through sensory motor learning. But then adults come in and they have learned it somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's part of the process that they use.
Yes.
So why is this relevant for us to understand as a therapist, and how do we use it in therapy?
Because the overwhelming majority of rumination episodes that we have as adults, we're not sure about children. We think children probably ruminate because of positive experiences. Adults almost always ruminate because of negative experiences.
The research that I was looking at was talking about rumination being a childhood eating process concern.
That's, yes. If you look up on, there is a rare but very real and even dangerous eating disorder that is called infant rumination, childhood rumination. We're not talking about that. That's a completely different thing.
All right.
That's a medical condition that has to do with the way in which a child either gets nutrition or processes nutrition. And that's different than what we're talking about, the cognitive process of rumination, where a person is feeding and thought back on itself.
So overlap. You have a teenage girl that
Right.
has an eating disorder. She's going to be doing a lot of ruminations about her body image, about her weight control, about power, and reducing the world down to something that she has power over, where nothing else in her life does she have power over. Those kind of things start at a level for the clinician with a recognition you're ruminating about these things.
Right.
We have to point that out to you and get you to a place where you're willing to see it. Then we have to work on how do we disrupt the rumination process.
Right.
Because that script is going to continue to relapse and play out.
Right.
Overlap.
Right.
And it's doing real damage to you.
Right. And so a lot of us, well, not all, a lot of us, we will ruminate about a thing that will have its origin in one of our core irrational beliefs. So one of the most basic core irrational beliefs that most of us carry with us in a pathologic way is, I'm not good enough. Essentially, I'm unlovable.
Yeah.
So the rumination process
Well, we've also
is
been given that as a script as a
Right.
child. You're
Well,
not
and
lovable
yes.
because you're a burden on the family.
Yeah, those are scripts,
Yeah.
and they get internalized, introjected, and then we carry those around with us. We believe it, and then we ruminate like, "Oh, I'm ugly, or I'm fat," and then I'm going to post my pictures on the interwebs and try and get people to say nice things about me, but they won't because people are notoriously just viciously cruel on the internet. So then you get all of these negative messages, which you then say, "Oh, that confirms my worldview," and so now that just makes me believe that I'm unlovable even more. And so we ruminate on these messages, we feed them back on themselves, and what happens is then that activates the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, and we have these stress overloads with cortisol and adrenaline. And what we want to try and do is help people to be able to recognize you have some volitional physical control over that process.
So if I'm ruminating about these things, and I'm a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm ruminating because on the internet, my friends
Right.
are bullying me and saying horrible things about me. They're laughing at me. They're making jokes about me. They're publicizing my embarrassing moments,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I may ruminate about killing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And years ago, when I studied suicide in college, and then I worked with a number of suicidal individuals, especially adolescents, my understanding was that frequently adolescent suicidal ideation has to do with, I'll kill myself and then you will be sorry because you've mistreated me or not loved me or what have you. I don't hear that that's the primary driver anymore. I hear that the primary driver in these days has to do with that bullying from the internet, that sense of anomaly, of isolation, of aloneness. I can't make a connection. I don't have anybody to belong to. My social circle is limited. And I understand that young white males are killing themselves at 4 times the rate of any other population group. And some of my understanding, the research that I've heard or read, has to do with young white males in this country are not seeing themselves move forward in their lives in a hopeful way. They're maybe 60% of the people in college now are female. They don't see a career path that's going to pay them a lot of money.
Right.
Give them, and they're not making relationships. They're not dating people. They're not having sex. I mean, things that we typically assume, oh, you 22-year-old young white male, you got your life in front of you and you're going gangbusters. I wish I could go back and start over. That's not their reality. And it's really causing some concern among people that study adolescents and young adults. What are we going to do about this population? Because they're in trouble. And so far, society, I mean, it's like the DEW line, the distant early warning line for national defense. The alarms are going off, and we need to do something about it for that, with that group of young men.
And I think that the key to that, what you just said, was that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
So Robert Waldinger, who runs the happiness study at Harvard University, wrote a book, The Good Life, just a couple, I think came out last year, which is a great book, by the way. So if you haven't read it, pick it up. It's fantastic. But basically what they've found, this is the longest continuously running psychological experiment in the history of mankind. They've been doing it since the early 1930s. And what they have found is happiness does not correlate with how much money you make, with what your position of power is. It only correlates with the number of quality relationships that you perceive that you have in your life.
So the more we isolate ourselves into our walled off gardens, I mean, we talk about neighborhoods. Do you live in a neighborhood, or do you live in an area where there are several different houses and people live in them, but you don't know any of them?
I was just going to say, you can live in a neighborhood, but unless you feel connected
It's not
to
a
the other
neighborhood.
individuals, it's not
the
relevant.
traditional definition of neighborhood. I was very happy, my wife and I were very happy and grateful that both of our sons were raised in neighborhoods where the other adults knew them
Mm-hmm.
and felt free to correct them if they were misbehaving.
Mm-hmm.
Remember one time my youngest son was down the street playing with a couple of kids on a church lot, and they found some like soda bottles
Mm-hmm.
that were sitting out, and they were throwing them against the dumpster and breaking them, throwing rocks at them, just having a good time destroying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the neighbors found them doing it and said, "This is not what you guys need to be doing. Clean this mess up."
Mm-hmm.
So then I come out and I'm calling Spencer, come home for dinner, come home for dinner. I'm yelling at Spencer, "Where are you?" And she calls me on the phone. And she says, "He's down at the church parking lot, and he will be home when he cleans up his mess." And I was so grateful
Yeah.
that she corrected him appropriately. She taught him community awareness. She taught him responsible behaviors. She made him have a responsible consequence. And she sent him home to me to reinforce the lesson.
Right, right.
And in today's world,
Right.
that doesn't happen as often.
Yeah.
I mean, now people teach their children, be afraid of the strange man who might carry you off and hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if as an older man, if I see some child wandering around in the store lost, and I try to comfort them, there are limits on what I'm able. You know, if a 3-year-old who's crying, you ought to be able to pick them up and hug them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not your kid. And
Right.
You know, where are their parents? Well, they're off shopping somewhere in Target.
And nowadays, a lot of people would be afraid if they made that phone call to you and said, "Hey, Spencer's down at the church
Yeah.
house. He's cleaning up his mess." They'd be afraid they're going to get sued. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, so rumination, we can deal with it at all these levels. We experienced it all our life, probably doing it right now, but it can be a clinical contribution with appropriate tools to help somebody get stronger, get better, which is what therapy is all about.
amen. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett. So, do you want to make a choice? We have rumination or mirroring. Let's do rumination.
Okay.
You've been wanting to
That's,
talk
that's the
about
choice I was going to make.
it. Yeah.
'Cause I was sitting here ruminating about it.
Were you?
No, not really, but
Been-